Times Square billboard. Tell us more.
Well, out of the blue, we were contacted about 4 weeks ago. Our ministry is Hope for the Heart, and somehow there was this huge digital billboard in Times Square. Times Square, I later learned, 328,000 people a day.
That's amazing.
I mean, 28,000 people a day are in Times Square in the heart of New York City. And we were called by an ad agency to let us know that a client for that big, huge billboard canceled, and they looked for an entity, nonprofit, which we are. We're very, very nonprofit, so that it's not a laughing matter, but we know what it's like to be nonprofit. The point is, though, we have material. They were looking for an entity that had material on, they called it sexual assault. I did not know this until this call came in. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And so they got on the web and noticed that we have, 100 topics. Now, some of our topics did deal with this particular area.
Sure.
Childhood sexual abuse, rape recovery, and we have abuse recovery. There were issues of sexual addiction and sexual integrity that we have, but they contacted us, and but this other entity was $33,000 that they were going to be paying for just 15 seconds, 4 times an hour, and 24 hours a day for a week. And there's no way we could afford anything like that. And they did not say that we would be charged that. They said, we will give you this time at cost. If you would be interested. Until they contacted us first. And I was hearing this, and we had to do it fast turnaround. And I thought, okay, the cost was $5,600, and we have no budget for that. But I thought all the people that could potentially be helped, that would have no idea about our ministry and our resources, our audio series, and just the downloads that they could get. And so I thought, yes, let's go on and do that. And then in the middle of that week that we were doing this ad campaign, they said, if you would like one more week, we will double your exposure to 8 times an hour. Now, again, it's just 15 seconds. That's and right. Yet they recognize the quality of what we had to offer in terms of reliability and substantive material. And so as a result, we did get several thousand downloads, meaning people going and all, the last slide, if you will, is just there is hope, very large, hopefortheheart.org/help me, large, help me. And so even though we didn't give a phone number, we did, of course, get calls. And we have a care center, and that's what they're for. They're there to take the calls. And so periodically I'd be going in and say, how are the calls? And they would tell me what type of call had just come in to help either parents, just the whole gamut of need. And because most people don't know what to do.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they don't. And I was just wondering how many people might respond. When I've spoken on this before, I usually say that about 1 out of every 4 women may have been abused before the age of 18. And I think you've used a figure 1 out of 6 men or something like that.
Correct.
You would think a lot of people, they would be feeling so much shame and privacy, they wouldn't want to even talk about that. But obviously, you've hit quite a nerve right there in Times Square, of all places.
Well, I think as time went on, the people who would see it, I think they got courage to contact. But you're 100% right. Children typically do not tell.
That's right.
They don't know what to do. They feel paralyzed. In fact, I just talked with a very high-profile person yesterday, describing, she's from New York, and she was telling me how she got in movie theater, and as a girl, she got someone sitting next to her who she didn't know began to violate her, and she didn't know what to do. No one had ever even told her this could take place. Well, this person's a lot older, and so it's like she wasn't a little kid. I mean, but I think she was a young teenager, and she just froze. And she said, "That's all I did. I froze." And then finally, it dawned on her that she could leave, but a long time had elapsed, and she said that for years and years and years she never told, and that's typical for children not to tell. But I think the problem is this: there are times when children do tell, but they're not believed. Now that's double victimization. That hurts my heart for anyone who finally has the courage to tell. And I'm going to be very candid. There are times when males don't tell, but they have an added layer of fear and protection, and that is they're afraid of being accused of being homosexual. If it's male on male, then there's a whole nother realm here that females typically do not have. And so the point for us is to know that perpetrators count on children to keep the secret. They're going to count on that.
Right.
It's true. Most do keep the secret. So the important thing is Jesus said, the truth sets you free. And that's why it's all important to be willing to speak the truth. And okay, there could be a threat. Now, the threat could be, if you tell,
right,
I will kill the pet. I'll kill your dog. I will, or mother will divorce me, and I'll never see you again. Or I'll kill you, or I'll kill your. So there are threats in certain ways. There are a lot of issues why children don't tell.
Let's take a break, and we are going to continue talking about this outreach for sexual abuse victims. And again, I might even commend to you some of the material that is available at Hope for the Heart. We maybe later on we'll get to Dysfunctional Family. If not, we'll postpone that for the next time we have June in. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Members of Congress who are currently resisting attempts to reform the tax code and reduce regulation should look at the recent Index of Economic Freedom. The United States has the lowest ranking ever in this index. For years, the United States was in the top 10. Now it sits at number 17. Countries with a higher ranking include Hong Kong, New Zealand, Switzerland, Estonia, Australia, Chile, and Canada. 3 of the many reasons for America's decline in economic freedom are debt, taxes, and regulations. Annual deficits and a national debt approaching $20 trillion saddle the country with obligations that reduce its freedom. You can see this in your own life. If you have $30,000 in credit card debt, you're less likely to buy a new car, refinance your house, or go on a vacation. The U.S. tax rate is another reason for the country's decline in economic freedom. The top individual income tax rate is 39%, and the top corporate tax rate remains among the world's highest at 35%. But even this high tax rate cannot keep up with government spending that last year amounted to 38% of GDP. Burdensome regulations also reduce our freedom. One study concluded that our economy has been burdened with more than 20,000 new regulations since 2008. That's added 572,000 pages to the Federal Register, which place an ever-increasing burden on small businesses. Another study found a net increase in new businesses in the late 1990s, but a net loss of businesses in the last part of the first decade of the 21st century. Will the current administration and Congress turn this around? Little has been said about reducing the debt, but President Trump has proposed tax reform and has used an executive order and other means to slightly reduce the regulatory burden. Perhaps the U.S. will rise in next year's Index of Economic Freedom. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We're just having in studio with us today, June Hunt. You can listen to the program, but of course you can also watch it as well. And let me just encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net, which will immediately link you to Hope for the Heart and some of the resources. We also have a link to the book we were going to discuss, The Dysfunctional Family. And if you want that information, it's available. But of course, you can also go to Hope for the Heart. And we're talking about this outreach for sexual abuse victims in New York City on Times Square. This is just exciting to see that kind of exposure. But again, let's, if we can, June, for just a minute, talk about the fact that there have been some very high-profile individuals that have come out and shared their story, right?
You know, when we first began our ministry, Hope for the Heart, this was one of our topics, and meaning we addressed the subject, and for 5 days we talked about this topic, and I was hearing, well, nobody talks about this topic on radio, but you know, I just know it's a reality, and so we did it, and then I started getting all these letters, and it was like, I've never told anyone this before. This is the first time, and it'd be someone who would be up in years, like 60 years old, but they have a heart then for others because they know what it's like to have this unspoken pain. And during that first year, I had a call from my sister who lived in Denver, and she said, "June, you need to know about Marilyn Vanderburg, Miss America." And I said, "Okay." And she said she has just come out after a number of years saying that she was a victim of childhood sexual abuse. And I thought, Miss America.
Miss America.
And so I saw People magazine, you know, these major stories on her because she was so high profile. And so I got into really her story, and then I ended up talking with her several times and meeting with her. The bottom line is she didn't plan to be Miss America. Some friends just wanted her to, just join, just be a part of this beauty contest thing in Denver, and she did. And her prayer was that she would not fall off the runway. And it was amazing. She became Miss America. And then she had a whirlwind tour of which every Miss America does, all over, speaking everywhere. And later became voted the #1 female speaker of the year, businesses, corporate America. She was a host of 23 television specials. And when she was 24, a former youth director from Denver asked if he could come see her and he could talk to her. He flew in and he said, "Marilyn, I'm going to say 2 words to you. Father, bed. Father, bed." And all of a sudden, this flood of memories comes back. She had been sexually abused from age 5 to 18.
Wow.
5 to 18 by her socialite, philanthropist father, you know, just the things he was involved in, the financial contributions to all these high-profile society entities, and some were good, really, very good entities. And yet, at night, he would sexually abuse his daughter. And by the way, I'll just say not just her, but not to get onto that. What ultimately happened was, and you could tell, she was, it's like here's this shock of this flood of memories. She describes herself as being a day child and a night child. The day child, that was the straight A student, the swim champ, the musician, had no knowledge of the night child. Yeah. No knowledge. So it's called dissociation. And I'm going to be very candid. I call that a gift from God, that she was able to split so that she wouldn't have, as a child, a mental, emotional breakdown, because she carried her pain, but it was a part of her, only a part of her that carried that pain. And that's what happens when you're age 7 and younger.
Mm-hmm.
If you're 7, if there's a trauma, a terrible tragedy, a trauma, something highly traumatic, if you're 7 or younger, the brain can split off and, if you will, carry that pain. And when you think of dissociation, you think of times, I can think of times when I have driven and I thought, oh, I don't even remember driving here.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You can, everyone does that to a degree with familiarity, but this is a type of disorder. It does impair normal functioning.
Right.
So the bottom line is, as she began to deal with these memories now, they were stunning to her, and the abuse. And so there were certain things we tell in our material on childhood sexual abuse, because we take her story all the way through.
Sure.
But what was interesting is when her daughter was age 5, all of a sudden she started having physical symptoms that correlated to when she was age 5, when the abuse started, and her body started shutting down. So sometimes people are absolutely unaware. They know something's wrong. They have no idea. They have no memories of what went on. Many times those memories begin to resurface if they hear a program like this.
Right.
And because that's what happened when we were a new little program called Hope for the Heart. And we would get these letters. It's like, I've never told anyone this before. And this would be someone definitely, years, and they would say how old they were. We would get all these letters, but it was, I never told anyone this before. But by speaking about it, we gave permission to speak up about it for the listener.
In your book, you refer to it as the secret storm, and that's the thing. For a lot of them, it's a secret even to themselves. So the first question that certainly comes up is, well, why don't they leave? Now, a child, you can understand why they don't leave, but even as you and I have talked about abuse before, there are sometimes all sorts of manipulation that takes place that keeps individuals from walking away from that, right?
Yes. They feel immense shame. Typically, they blame themselves. And I want to be very strong on this. I'm going to try to get my strong voice.
It's a strong voice.
No child is ever guilty of sexual abuse. This is in the perpetrator's mind. If you have believed, those of you who are identifying with this right now, if you have believed it was your fault, it's typically, why didn't I get up? Why didn't I leave? Why didn't I run? Why didn't I tell? Because you're probably told not to tell, because you weren't told what to do if you were going to be abused, if somebody tried to touch you inappropriately. And so they can feel it's my fault. And they're told many times, it's your fault.
Yes.
You wanted this. And all kinds of words. So with this guilt, understand it is false guilt. It's not true guilt. And it's vital to clear that up. And sometimes if you're trying to help somebody else, you need to repeat it multiple times. They fear they could go to jail. They could go to jail. They fear they will lose the love and loyalty of the abuser. Now think about this. When we hear the word rape, that's violent. That's usually something that is unexpected and violent. Childhood sexual abuse typically is not. If you're talking about the normal course, there are certain stages. There's the seduction, and it's gifts. You're so dear to me. You're the most special person in my life. I love you. So there's all this cultivating.
Yes.
And so
cultivating.
And so it's very confusing, because that person can be actually the most loving acting, but they have an ulterior motive. And that's what we need to understand. All that glitters is not gold when there is affection.
We're talking with June Hunt in studio, and if you'd like to join us a little bit later, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, we have a link to Hope for the Heart, and talking about sexual abuse, and in particular started out because of this wonderful opportunity that came in a billboard there at Times Square. We come back, I want to talk about what can parents do and what can you do, and if you've been abused, is there hope? Of course there is, and we'll talk about that right after these important messages. Stay tuned, and we'll be back right after these messages.
What difference does it make when you support Point of View? For Lee Weaver and his family, it meant doing something to reach out to women in need, and so far, to help bring nearly 5,000 babies into the world.
As a family, we were sitting around the dinner table. Our older daughter said, "Dad, we need to do something about it." And that kind of struck a chord in our family. All of that started out of Point of View and the effect it had on our conversations and our heart, leading us into don't be hearers only, but doers of the word. Point of View has always been real supporters of the concept that we're a small part of.
Your support of Point of View inspires people to do great things. You partner in spreading truth around the world. But the only way to make that happen is for you to make the call or visit us online and join the Truth Team. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Do it now. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. In studio with us today, June Hunt of Hope for the Heart. We may take some calls a little bit later, but we want to get some more facts on the table. And one of those is, how to respond to all of this. First of all, let's talk about what parents can do. Sometimes we make a mistake. I've heard said that we say, well, respect your elders. And I maybe even have said that to my kids once or twice, but most of the time I talk about there are proper things to do and improper things, because even as I was raising my kids, I began to realize we need to talk about the things that just because that person says that they're a friend of yours doesn't mean you should get into the car. Even if they say mommy's hurt, don't necessarily believe that. If they want to take you somewhere, we want to have chaperones and all that. But still, over time, parents sometimes have done some harm by saying, always trust those people and obey those people that are
your
older
elders.
than you.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
That sometimes gets you in trouble, doesn't it?
Now, I asked a bunch of people yesterday, we were talking about all these interviews I've been doing, and I said, how many of you, I said, is there anyone here who did not hear obey your elders? And I said, now, how many of you did hear it? And all the hands went up, men and women.
Sure.
And I said, it's logical. Now, that was intended to be protective. But the problem is, if there is a pedophile, if there's someone who comes on the scene and appears so thoughtful, it could be, and I need to say this, in regard to childhood sexual abuse, it usually occurs with someone who the child knows and trusts.
Not a stranger, yeah.
No. We're talking about parents, grandparents. I remember in our first year of existence, 30 years ago, one of our team members had just opened the mail and was reading through to determine how to help. And she was about 28 years old and sharp gal. And she looked ashen, and she had this letter and just froze and just slowly walking. And she said, I've just read my story. And it had been blocked from her memory.
Wow.
And it was a grandfather. And she said, I can't believe this. This is my story. And by the way, that's when memories, that's good. That means memories can come back.
Come up, yeah.
And that did happen with her. And yet, I do want to say that if for any reason you were to hear, no, I don't want to go to, if it's uncle, let's say it's typically a grandfather's house. I don't want to go. Of course you want to go. You always love going to your grandparents' house. I don't want to go. Now, if there's an aversion, and it hasn't been any kind of aversion in the past, there is something that you need to do. You don't just try to steamroll your child to go to keep the normal visiting that would be customary within your family. Just take your child aside where it's just the two of you and just say, honey, at times do you feel something's uncomfortable that happens to you? And you don't like it, but you don't know what to do. At times do you feel uncomfortable? Is something happening? Has something happened to you? And we have a way to protect children, but go there and just say, has anyone tried to touch you in a way and you don't like it? Or you don't know what to do about it? And it's right for you to tell me. Honey, it's right for you to tell me. See, because they will be told often, don't tell anyone. This is our secret.
That's right.
So I think this is important to realize, because we adults, the adult generation, typically they're not ever told how to protect themselves. So they haven't protected their own children.
Right.
So we put into writing, I love this, by the way.
Yes.
It's just what we have in what we call them our biblical counseling keys, or in our material that we have for childhood sexual abuse. These are statements that you can make that will instill confidence in your child and build assertiveness in a young heart that doesn't know what to do. But the intent is to help your child resist whatever kind of inappropriate sexual advances. God loves you and made your body with a special plan and purpose.
Very good.
If you're asked to do something you think is wrong, say no. And be strong. By the way, this is where you could say, hey, let's say that stronger. Do it with me, Kirby.
No.
Okay, say no.
No.
Okay,
No.
Say it stronger.
No.
Now, see, you're smiling. I'm smiling. Okay, this is good, though. This is helping them
Yes.
hear themselves say no.
Say no.
Okay.
Very good.
Now, your body belongs to you, and you decide who touches it. Here's the key phrase. This is the best of all. The parts of your body covered by your bathing suit are private. Never allow anyone to touch your private parts unless it's for medical reasons and a parent is present. If someone tries to touch your private parts, scream and run to a safe place. If someone touches your private parts and says it's okay, they are wrong. You must tell me or tell someone you trust, someone, a responsible adult. Tell anyway. If a person doesn't stop touching and says, then you say, I'll tell if you don't stop. Then tell me or someone else when you're safe. If someone threatens you, don't be afraid. Tell anyway. If you're asked to keep the touching a secret, tell anyway. If the person you tell doesn't believe you, keep telling anyway. No matter how embarrassed you feel, keep telling until someone believes you. And here's the last sentence. You need to identify and pray to have a safe, responsible adult you can trust to help you, someone who is not a member of the family.
Mm-hmm.
This is protection power.
Yes.
And the other day, I had a woman in the studio when I was doing the radio program Hope in the Night. She heard that I was doing this doing this ad campaign, and she said, "Oh, June," she said, "last week I did the protection power on my grandchildren," and she said, "Tomorrow night I'm going to do it again." And I said, "You feel impassioned about this?" And she said, "Yes. That was my background. I was sexually abused."
What would you say for all the pastors and Sunday school leaders, Bible fellowship leaders, and others? We have quite a number that are either pastors or even I know a number of seminary students write to me and things like that. And they say, this is not something we've ever discussed from the pulpit. This is not something we've ever really talked about. But then once we developed a children's ministry, we said we have to do something. Are there resources at Hope for the Heart? Are there some suggestions you might give for pastors right now? Kind of wondering if they look out in their congregation, they have all those women, 1 out of 4, all those men, 1 out of 6. This is an issue they should address, but most of them say, I don't even know what to say.
Well, you can know that there will be many, many, many in your congregation. I was told, by the way, we had a part-time policeman who worked at our ministry, and he said, "June, I know your statistics, but let me tell you the police statistics. It's 1 in 3 girls,
Wow.
1 in 5 boys. So if you just think 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3,
Wow.
think of all the Sunday school classes. Now, I'm going to say several things. Number 1, you do need to be aware. There are some entities that will say, churches, scouts, they'll have 2 adults to accompany a child to the restroom.
Yes.
2 adults, not just 1. In terms of using this, I was teaching at the Crystal College. I was asked a number of years ago to teach a J term just on this one topic. Now, look, I like guys. I like you, Kirby. I like men. But what I say is, my strong suggestion is, please don't have young men boys who would be going through puberty to be, quote unquote, babysitters, child sitters, why put them in harm's way?
Yeah.
Why, if they're having urges that they've never had before, they're going through this change of life, and they're having sensations that are very tempting, because I do know situations where later men have confessed that they have taken advantage of children.
Wow. Going to take a break, and we'll continue our conversation with June Hunt. And again, we have a link to hopefortheheart.org. You may find yourself saying, I want to get some of the same material that was being made available at the Times Square billboard, and it's all available at the website. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. We recently discussed an Ohio court's refusal to consider the expulsion of a student studying for the priesthood from a Catholic college. That court declined jurisdiction because it would be forced to determine religious and doctrinal matters that are beyond the court's authority. A recent case out of Pennsylvania shows us that religious organizations remain subject to secular courts on matters neutral to religion. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, another religious college expelled a student weeks before graduation. The student alleged that he was expelled because of his race. The college asserted that the court would entangle itself in religious doctrine if it endeavored to hear the student's case, and therefore the ecclesiastical abstention doctrine should bar the court's intervention. But the state appellate court disagreed. It noted that determining claims for racial discrimination did not require the court to construe religious doctrine. The college had not claimed the expelled student violated any specific religious doctrine. Instead, the court concluded, quote, willful, deceitful, and dishonest behavior is routinely addressed through the law without resort to religious doctrine. As proponents of religious liberty, we believe the judiciary has its proper sphere of authority, every bit as much as the church has its own sovereignty. Where the church's sovereignty is distinct and superior, it is right for a court to defer to the religious body in governing itself. But when proper, the church is right to submit to a just government. Determining where that line is drawn is a serious task that courts must approach with great caution. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window clean at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window clean.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have June Hunt in studio today and talking about this outreach that they had in New York Times Square and the issue of sexual abuse, and especially focusing at the moment on childhood sexual abuse. Let's take a phone call. This is a caller that would like to remain anonymous, calling in from the New England area. So thank you for calling. What would you like to share with us?
Hello.
Yes,
Hi.
go ahead.
Do you have a question or a statement?
Hi, this is Anna. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Sure,
can.
go
Thank
ahead.
you.
Yeah, I just want to tell you I live in California, and what I want to share with you is that, oh my God, you've made a pit in my stomach when listening. I just turned you on by accident. I love the program, but I normally don't listen to it. I listen to other music. And I turned it on, I got a stomach ache, and I and I was listening to you, and you brought up memories, but you also you just gave me a healing, because you said, I was wondering, how did I not forget? How do I forget? And how did I make it this far with that memory? And you said dissociation. And I thought, thank you, God, thank you. It was you that took care of that. So when I'm up in my 70s, okay? Wow. And mind you, you're finding this out right now. And I was wondering how, because and then back in the day, you never talked about this.
Yes.
Okay. This is what happened to us. Later in life, when we're married, we have kids, this is what happened to us. 5 sisters and 1 brother. My father was sexually abusing my younger sister.
Let me just, unfortunately, we got a little bit of a cross music there, but I think we got part of that, so maybe you could help her. But she raised a couple of issues. She's in her 70s and has dissociated.
Yes.
Number 2, here we're talking about a father and some others, and the audio wasn't very good, but maybe you could go from there and help us begin to think through what has happened and how to begin to get out of that and deal with those memories.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, the Lord, this is Psalm 34:18, and this is for you, sweetheart. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. What happened to you was ungodly. This is never allowed in Scripture. And you see a forbidding of this behavior. But when you realize what has happened, people are given free will. God made us all with free will. And so, therefore, at times, instead of us being robots, because we're not robots, where God is forcing everybody to do what's right, with being in a free will existence, at times others will go against God's will, and we can be victims of someone else's wrong. And what I would say is, with what happened to you, you can be so compassionate, so much more compassionate than those who never experienced this.
Right.
One thing I know is, whenever we go through something that's very, very painful, very, very hard, it stretches our capacity for compassion. I have an idea that you would be more compassionate than most people who would have never experienced this, even though there's a huge number. But one thing that where people can stay stuck, I need to say, the first thing you've done is you've admitted it, you've spoken it. And when Jesus says the truth sets you free, we are not to be hiding, and we'll be in bondage. And there's no reason for you to be a prisoner of the past. God does not want you to be a prisoner of the past. Instead, you take the past experiences of pain, and not only are you compassionate toward others, but also you can be a protector, which you certainly, I'm sure, want to be, based on what we even described, of how to talk to children, a grandparent, as you probably are, by virtue of being in your 70s. What a wonderful opportunity to help be a protector. But also, one of the things that you have to look at is the issue of, and some people won't like this, forgiveness. The thing is, how can you forgive anyone who would do something so horrid? And that is a legitimate objection to the topic of forgiveness. But the word forgive means release. Release. It's not excusing unjust behavior. It's not letting a person off the hook. See, I used to think forgiveness was wrong because you're letting the person off the hook. Mm-hmm. Instead, I want you to think about this. It's taking that person who has wronged you, and you take them off of your emotional hook,
right,
and you put them onto God's hook, those who have harmed you. You're not releasing them from responsibility, but instead of you carrying all that pain, especially as memories come, you continue to release the pain to God, and you release the person, in this case your father, to God. And it's a mental thing you do. It's not because you're feeling so forgiving, but the Bible says, bear with each other and forgive whatever grievance you have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. So really all it is releasing the pain to God, releasing the person, the offender, to God by taking that person off of your hook, putting that person onto God's hook. That's one thing that can help you. A second thing I want to mention that's important. I remember a woman telling me about her situation. She was a singer. She sang for many, many Christian conferences, and I learned that she had been a victim of childhood sexual abuse by her brother. One day, she flew to their hometown, and she let him know that she wanted to come and spend a little time with him. So there he was. And this is what she said. Now listen carefully. I just want you to know, I remember what you did to me in my past.
Wow.
I remember, and I have chosen to forgive you. My prayer is that one day you would actually come into a life-changing relationship with God, because Christ actually healed me of the abuse. And I do want you to have that full healing inside your life, because the wrong that you did, while I can forgive you, there needs to be a change in your life. Now, what happened was, he didn't deny it, which is unusual, by the way. Normally there's a denial. 3 weeks later, he humbled his heart and prayed to receive Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior.
What a great story.
Totally changed his life. He ended up getting into Bible study. Men began to mentor him, and then he even became a deacon at a church, and he had a passion to help others come to Christ and have a changed life too.
Let's again talk about some of the resources at Hope for the Heart. Of course, you can also listen to June at Hope in the Night and hopefortheheart.org. But again, Help Me, would that be something that, again, if you would like to have some of the same resources that they've been making available to all the people that watch that Times Square billboard. So it's just amazing that you have that opportunity. And again, always great to have you in studio. We'll come back maybe next time and talk about the dysfunctional family. That was what we had planned. But again, since this has just taken place, we thought you'd like to know about that. Let me also commend to you the book that I have on my shelf and have certainly benefited from, How to Rise Above Abuse, Victory for Victims of 5 Types of Abuse. We've been talking, of course, about just the first one of those, which is childhood sexual abuse, but also spiritual abuse, verbal and emotional abuse, victimization, and wife abuse. So lots of great material. You can find it at hopefortheheart.org. June, always great to have you in studio. Let's do it again soon.
I'd love it. Thank you so much.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about how these phones and our technology is changing our lives, and that's going to be a fascinating conversation with Tony Reinke. 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. I think it will be one of those that will bring great conviction and cause you to maybe rethink how you order your life. We'll take a break, come back with him right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time really focusing once again on how technology, especially our phones, are affecting us. You might remember some of the conversations we've had in the past. We've talked about Nicholas Carr's book, The Shadows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. We've talked with Kathy Cook about screens and teens, but we want to get into this new book, 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. And you might remember earlier in the week, we had Dr. Trevin Wax on the program, and his first chapter dealt with that. And I mentioned that we were going to be talking with Tony Reinke, and he said, oh, well, I'm very familiar with the book. As a matter of fact, of course he is, because he actually is one of the individuals that endorsed this book. And I think you're going to find it very helpful. It is, again, written by Tony Reinke, who spends his time as a staff writer, senior writer for desiringgod.org. Also is the host of the popular Ask Pastor John podcast. And of course, this book is endorsed and has a foreword written by John Piper. You may have seen his earlier book called Lit, which was a Christian guide to reading books. And this one, 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You, published by Crossway. And so, Tony, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kirby, I'm honored to be on. Thanks for having me.
We enjoyed talking about you this last week with Trevin Wax. And, of course, he is one of a number of people that we've interviewed on this program that endorse your book. And before we get into the issue of the phone, one of the things I appreciated about your book is you spend just a little bit of time getting us thinking about technology. My latest book is on technology and social trends, and most Christians have really not thought about technology very much. They either go to one extreme where they just love all the technology, they just read a Steve Jobs book and they think technology is great, or they think all the technology is evil because they've read Jacques Ellul. But you help us understand a little bit more about how to put technology in a theological framework. So help us out.
Yeah, I think the first question that Christians have to ask is, where does technology come from? And I think a lot of Christians, just the way they interact with technology or talk about it, think as though it's it's something that was imported into our creation by, I don't know, aliens from Mars or something. Like it's totally, from outside of our solar system. But technology is, I like to say, it's an organic process whereby God's created materials and God's created natural laws are used by his image bearers. And so I think of technology as being something that's organically taken out of his creation. That does not mean that everything that we make is good or righteous or holy, and it doesn't mean that every way that we use technology honors him. But that's simply to say that I think at the base level, when we talk about technology, what we're talking about is God making possible a trajectory of human progress that we find ourselves in. So Steve Jobs is not an accident. He is part of God's sovereign design over creation and how it's going to be cultivated. Again, not to baptize every technology, but simply to say that all of this reflects in some way the Creator who makes it possible to take raw materials in the earth and to use natural laws and to innovate. And it's part of a long trajectory that begins back in Eden, where we see the textile industry is born, where we see some sort of a prototype of a sword in the hands of the angel. There's certain technology that sort of begins in Eden that's going to eventually culminate in the new creation. And we're in the middle of a process now. So just beginning there, I think, is really helpful for Christians to orient and to know that technology can be good, it can be bad. And as Jacques Ellul, as Marshall McLuhan, and some of these guys have helped us see in the past, every technology, every advance in technology brings with it new curses, new problems that we have to fix with more technology. So it is an endless loop of blessings and curses, and we just have to realize that there's that tension there. But fundamentally, technology is something that's possible because the Creator makes it possible.
Well said. And again, this is why we need to have biblical discernment, and that's why we're going to talk about these 12 ways your phone is changing you. For those of you listening, you might take out a piece of paper and number 1 to 12. We'll try to cover all 12. If not, of course, I certainly would encourage all of you to get a copy of the book. We have information about that, as well as about Tony on the website. Let's get to the first one. We are addicted to distraction. Tony, we have every Wednesday, we have a Millennial Roundtable, and one of my regular participants, Nick Pitts, always reminds us how many times in an average day we assume that individuals, especially millennials, touch their phone. Your argument is 81,000 times each year, or once every 4.3 minutes. Now, I've had one of the other participants, Allie Beth Stuckey, who's convinced that number is too low. So again, maybe that depends the difference between men and women. But if you're talking about distraction, this is a whole new phenomenon that we have never experienced before in this age of technology.
Yeah, that's right. And we're seeing all the physical effects coming out of this. We're seeing eye strain and neck strain and hypertension, and we're seeing restlessness, sleeplessness, obesity rates are going up. I mean, we're seeing all the physical consequences. But in each of these 12 ways, what's interesting to me as I started to think through the different ways that our culture is saying that smartphones are changing us, what I see is that what Scripture offers us is an ability to take the conversation much deeper. So in chapter 1, everyone I know or have talked to know that smartphones are distracting us to death. I mean, that's what's happening. If you use a smartphone, you're going to be abusing it because you're going to be tempted by this candy bowl of sugar hits, these hyper-palatable distractions that are created for us to become addicted to. What Christians can do, though, is we can step into this conversation and we can say, yes, distractions are bad. We need to limit distractions, but we can go where the world doesn't go. And that is, number 1, asking the question, what is the undistracted life? And number 2, asking, what is the undistracted life for? Now, when you get down into those deeper questions, now you're talking about something that Paul explains in depth in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. In that context, he's talking about the decision between singleness and marriage, and it gets complex. It would be hard to sort of like boil down what Paul's doing in that entire chapter. I say all that just to say, when our culture raises questions about what are distractions doing to us, the Christian can step in and with an open Bible say, but what is the undistracted life and what is it for? And that's, I think, that's just an example of how each of these 12 ways, I start with the studies, I start with what culture is telling us is bad about the smartphone, and then pressing into the deeper spiritual questions that Jesus and the apostles are pressing us to think through, because these questions aren't really new.
Well, and again, I might just mention for our listeners out there that are teachers, and so I'm talking about pastors and Bible fellowship leaders and Bible study leaders and smart group leaders. You have quite a bit in there because, again, going back to 1 Corinthians 7, or even some of the points you make that unchecked distractions blind souls from God, unchecked distractions close off communication with God, unchecked distractions mute the urgency of God, and on and on. You give us quite a bit that actually could be even sermon topics if somebody wanted to take some of this and address it. I know you and Tim Challies and a few others are those who are thinking about how to apply those, but this is something I think really needs to be addressed from the pulpit, needs to be directed, and this is why I was thrilled to see that the foreword is written by John Piper so that people can see a little bit of just how a pastor would address it. So let's go to our first break. We've only talked about one of the 12. We'll make our way through all 12, I hope, by the end of the program, and if a little bit later you'd like to join us, you can join that conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know a little bit more about Tony and the work that he's doing and about Desiring God and some of the other materials that are available, we have some links there to desiringgod.org and information about the book and even a video. My assignment to you is to watch the video, then hit that share button and share it with somebody else and start a conversation. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, members of Congress who are currently resisting attempts to reform the tax code and reduce regulation should look at the recent Index of Economic Freedom. The United States has the lowest ranking ever in this index. For years, the United States was in the top 10. Now it sits at number 17. Countries with a higher ranking include Hong Kong, New Zealand, Switzerland, Estonia, Australia, Chile, and Canada. 3 of the many reasons for America's decline in economic freedom are debt, taxes, and regulations. Annual deficits and a national debt approaching $20 trillion saddle the country with obligations that reduce its freedom. You can see this in your own life. If you have $30,000 in credit card debt, you're less likely to buy a new car, refinance your house, or go on a vacation. The U.S. tax rate is another reason for the country's decline in economic freedom. The top individual income tax rate is 39%, and the top corporate tax rate remains among the world's highest at 35%. But even this high tax rate cannot keep up with government spending that last year amounted to 38% of GDP. Burdensome regulations also reduce our freedom. One study concluded that our economy has been burdened with more than 20,000 new regulations since 2008. That's added 572,000 pages to the Federal Register, which place an ever-increasing burden on small businesses. Another study found a net increase in new businesses in the late 1990s, but a net loss of businesses in the last part of the first decade of the 21st century. Will the current administration and Congress turn this around? Little has been said about reducing the debt, but President Trump has proposed tax reform and has used an executive order and other means to slightly reduce the regulatory burden. Perhaps the U.S. will rise in next year's Index of Economic Freedom. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let's stay with us today, Tony Reinke, and if you'd like to know a little bit more about him, we have a link to desiringgod.org, and there it's a link to the 12 ways your phone is changing you. You can get the book in your local bookstore, but there's also a place for you to download it and to order it, and also a video, which is just a little less than 2 minutes long, which I would encourage you to watch, and then click the share button. Put it on your Facebook page or your Twitter feed, or maybe send an email and start a conversation so that even people not listening to this program right now can benefit from some of that and maybe rethink how they use this technology, because sometimes the technology actually uses us. So, Tony, we'd already talked about distraction. The second one, we ignore our flesh and blood. Really part of that initially you talk about in terms of distraction, and that's, of course, the people that text and talk and drive. But then you also get into the broader issue of we also ignore that there's another person sitting across from you. And even yesterday in our millennial discussion, we pointed out that there's lots of evidence to suggest that people would never say face to face to someone what they feel free to say as they're maybe online. So there is a real need for us, as you quote from Doug Groteis, to recognize that we are holistic beings and we're a lot more than just text and tweets, aren't we?
Exactly. We ignore our neighbors, our family. We ignore the people around us. This is a perpetual problem that Jesus warned us about a long time ago. And I'm thinking of the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10. And there Jesus tells us, the priest and the Levite, they have their minds set on probably ministry things. The priest has to stay clean to get to the temple. The Levite maybe has a preaching gig he's trying to get to. And so there's this beat up Jew in the gutter of the street, and they step over him. They walk around him. And we're prone to do that in a much less dramatic way, but we're prone to ignore the needs at our feet because we've become so enamored with the possibilities out in the remoteness of the virtual world. And I coined the term embodied placidness. Embodied placidness. I mean, that's what neighboring is. Mm-hmm. It is a concern for the people around us. And like you said, I mean, we are prone to text and drive, and we endanger people on the road, driving past our neighbors at 50 miles an hour, distracted, unconcerned for them. And with, in 5 seconds in a slip, we could rip their family apart. We could have tremendous destructive impact on others. So we have to think of neighboring as being, I am responsible for those who are in physical proximity to me, and we have to reclaim that. And Jesus was telling about this a long time before Twitter and Facebook came around.
Very good. Third one, of course, is we crave immediate approval. We count up the number of Facebook friends, the number of likes we get, the number of hearts that are in Instagram, whatever it might be, but also just this idea of a celebrity mindset and seeking approval. This existed, as you well know, Tony, long before we ever had a smartphone, but smartphones are reinforcing that, aren't they?
Yeah, it sure is. Again, Jesus told us in John 12, the craving for human approval is going to kill your faith. And yet we find it so hard to put our phones away. I mean, because we fear one another and we want admiration from one another. We want validation from one another. And so we cultivate these inordinate desires for human approval through our social platforms. And Jesus is pretty clear. I mean, whoever loves you fill in the blank, whoever loves his social network more than me is not worthy of me. And so Jesus reminds us over and over again that if we are not seeking our validation and our approval in him, we're going to try and find it in the glory of other humans, and that is going to kill our faith. It's very destructive, and we see that played out time and time again. And I know for me, I've been on Instagram for several years, Facebook, Twitter for several years. I've felt this. I've experienced this firsthand, this desire, this impulse to be affirmed and validated. It is so subtle and destructive, and it is an enemy of the faith.
Let's see if we can get to at least another one, and that is we lose our literacy. Now, in the previous chapter, you talked about this survey of about 8,000 Christians and asked them how many nonfiction books they had read. And this is the concern. Again, some of these trends were happening before we had smartphones, so I don't want to lay all of the blame at the internet or smartphones. But the bottom line is we don't, as a culture, read very much. Now, I'm fortunate to be in a job that allows me and actually encourages me to read all the time. But you, as well as anybody else, are well aware of the fact that we now have this kind of mindset that says, well, I don't really need to read that book. I'll just get an excerpt of it. Maybe I can watch a YouTube clip about it. Or, maybe I can find it on Google or Wikipedia, and that's going to be enough. And so it's really changed our literacy, hasn't it?
It sure has. And, we are people of the book. So literacy is of premier importance for us as Christians. And for most Christians today, I mean, I would say a vast majority of Christians today, Scripture is the oldest and the longest and the most complex book that most Christians will ever seriously encounter or try to read on their own. And yet, at the same time, these hyper-palatable distractions are being created by an industry that's trying to get our attention and trying to break our attention span down into these 9-second fragments, which can be monetized. And so literacy can't compete with that kind of eye candy that you find on social media. And so you have to be very diligent. You have to use digital detoxes. You have to find ways to cultivate a sustained linear concentration in reading Scripture.
And you've also talked about, as you said, that it is the oldest, longest, most complicated book we'll ever try to read on our own. But there's another issue that obviously must strike you as ironic. And that is, Tony, I don't know too many people that don't have a version of their Bible on their phones, a version of their Bible on their iPad. Certainly, almost all of us have at least one or multiple versions on our computers. Maybe we have the whole Logos software, whatever. And yet, at a time when we have at our fingertips the Bible, we tend to be and seem to be reading the Bible less and less than in any time in modern history.
Yeah, that's very true. John Dyer, who is at Dallas Seminary, has done some reading studies on Bible reading plans, comparing print Bibles to digital Bibles, and his findings are really interesting. He finds that people who read a printed Bible tend to retain information more for longer periods of time, but people who read digitally, who use prompts on their phones, are actually more consistent in their Bible reading. So people who read from their printed Bibles can be less consistent. People with digital Bibles are more consistent, but people with digital Bibles are reading more quickly and not retaining as much. Right. So there's sort of a pro-con problem here on both sides. You pick your blessing and you pick your poison. The question is, can the next generation of Christians learn to linger over digital text? That's the big question. Because when you get into your digital Bible or you read anything that's digital, you tend to skim too quickly and don't retain much.
Well said. Just before we take a break, let's talk about some of the resources that we've already posted here. Of course, anybody that would like to get a copy of this book hopefully can find it in their local bookstore. It's published by Crossway, just outstanding, 200 pages, forward by John Piper. But we have a link, Tony, to desiringgod.org, and then a link to 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. And we also have that video. And you heard me say to my audience what I thought they might want to do, watch the video and then pass it on. But talk about some of the other resources that are there from you and John Piper and some of the others, because it's a great website for people to visit. So what do they find when they land there?
Yeah, well, you're going to find John Piper's entire archive of preaching, over 2,000 sermons, which is probably the big draw for teachers and for preachers. They're going to find a wealth of exegetical content there. Look at the Book is a video project where Pastor John takes a biblical text and actually walks through it with a pen and paper, and you see how he breaks the text down. Great help for exegetes who are trying to study Scripture and then expound it for a congregation. You're going to find the Ask Pastor John podcast, which is me asking Pastor John really hard questions about ethics and theology. So I'm usually on the other side of the microphone asking the hard questions to him. And we're about 1,000 episodes now into that podcast, Ask Pastor John. We publish 3 times a week. And then you're going to find multiple articles published every day in which we're trying to work out our core mission, which is helping people understand that God is most satisfied in us when God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him. And we're working that out in parenting and technology and dating and, I mean, you name it. We're trying to work that out in very concrete ways into everyday life.
And again, I would recommend the video. It's just very well done, very creative, funny, the kind of video that you can use to get some conversation going and might even bring a little conviction. So again, we've got all of that on our website, pointofview.net. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Tony Reinke today. The book is entitled 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You, as I mentioned, forward by John Piper, really looking at a number of very important issues related to this aspect of technology. And so when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about we become like what we like, we get lonely, sometimes we lose meaning, number of other topics. And of course, at any point, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll work our way through some of the other 12 ways your phone is changing you right after this.
What difference does it make when you support Point of View? For Lee Weaver and his family, it meant doing something to reach out to women in need, and so far, to help bring nearly 5,000 babies into the world.
As a family, we were sitting around the dinner table. Our older daughter said, "Dad, we need to do something about it." And that kind of struck a chord in our family. All of that started out of Point of View and the effect it had on our conversations and our heart, leading us into don't be hearers only, but doers of the word. Point of View has always been real supporters of the concept that we're a small part of.
Your support of Point of View inspires people to do great things. You partner in spreading truth around the world. But the only way to make that happen is for you to make the call or visit us online and join the Truth Team. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Do it now. 800-347-5151. and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Tony Reinke, and again, he is a journalist and also the senior writer for desiringgod.org, as well as the host of Ask Pastor John podcast, and also we have a link to his website talking about the book 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. Let's look at number 5. This one may be the hardest for some people to get their head around. We feed on the produced. and it kind of gets into the issue of art and creativity and a number of things. Explain, if you might, Tony, what you mean by that particular issue.
Yeah, there I'm trying to draw a distinction between what we see on our smartphones, which is by and large produced. It's produced by either a production company. It could be produced by our friends and family. If someone has said, this is important to see, and sort of set that content in some sort of a context to push us in a certain direction. We're looking at produced content all the time on our smartphones. And what I think Scripture calls us to do more fundamentally is make sure that we are rooted in creation and rooted in God's Word, and then out of those two things to speak, to make art, to preach sermons, to give voice to our faith, and to do the things that God has called us to do, and not so much just take our cues from the world of the produced, not just emulate the things that we see on our phone. So in that chapter, I'm just simply asking people, let's make sure that we are spending time in creation, make sure we are listening to the way God has designed us and rooted us in nature, and also listening to His Word, and not just taking people's word for what the Word says, but actually be in Scripture ourselves and let that shape us. And then out of that, then be a content producer online, an artist online out of that.
And again, you talked about the idea that there's some research suggesting that it affects the way our memories are, because we have what one psychologist calls kind of a camera-induced amnesia, because, well, it's on my camera, so I don't really need to kind of remember it. You've got even a quote from Andy Crouch talking about our smartphone addiction leads to creational blindness. So there's a lot in that chapter that you are really sort of calling out to those people that are creative, those people that are artists, to kind of rethink some of this as well, aren't you?
Absolutely. Let's not just pass along religious memes, but let's engage God's creation and His Word, and out of that create new art, creative art. Let our expression of art be something that comes from this place of really interacting with God fundamentally in His creation and in His Word, and not just simply echoing what we see in the world of the produced media.
Tony, let's talk about we become like what we like. And of course, the like button is something that was sort of genius, because then you can like a Facebook post or a Twitter tweet or an Instagram picture, whatever it might be. But that gets us down to kind of the story of Narcissus, doesn't it?
That's right. It sure does. I mean, this gets really deep into human motivation. And essentially my point there is that we become what we most love. And whatever we most love is offered to us in our phones. It becomes a commodity to be consumed on our screens. And if you add that to the accessibility we have, to the fact that if you add that fact that we can buy or see anything we really want to, even things that are, I mean, most bluntly, I mean, pornography would be the big example. If you take that sort of offering of things that we should not be so readily offered, and you take that and see that we are very porous beings, we're becoming like what we see. We're becoming like what we fill our eyes with. This is very profound, and it's such a mystery, but it's so true that we are porous beings. We're being changed by the things that we see. We're being changed by the images of bodies we see online. We're being changed by the luxuries we see online that we can't afford. And yet we're reaching for these idols, and they're transforming us into their image. And the challenge for Christians, the challenge for every human being, is that we would behold the transforming glory of Jesus Christ and to be transformed into His image. Either we're being transformed into the image of Christ, or we're being transformed into the image of our idols. So this is anthropology 101, I call it. I mean, this is basic level what it means to be a created human being, but it's still a profound mystery. My point is just the fact that what we like online is what we're being transformed into.
Yes. And again, certainly Paul warns us about that in Colossians 2:8, that we're not to be taken captive by the false philosophy of the world, but instead in 2 Corinthians 10 that we are to take every thought captive. So again, if we aren't thinking biblically about these issues, if we aren't exercising discernment, then we become conformed to this culture and to the world around us. And so again, I'm pulling together 3 or 4 different verses, but I think you can kind of get the sense of that already being an issue that Christians have had to address for millennia, but certainly this one becomes even more significant in terms of our smartphones. Let's, if we can, Tony, maybe get to another one. We get lonely. kind of interesting how technology can lead to isolation. We've oftentimes on this program talked about the book Bowling Alone, in which a lot of people are already somewhat isolated. There is kind of an interesting irony as well. In some respects, Tony, with Facebook, we may be in contact with people all over the world. I know what missionaries are doing in other countries, and I know what people are doing on the other side of this planet and even on the other side of this country. So in one sense, I'm in contact, but in another sense, this technology really creates isolation, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Technology at its root fundamentally offers us both, the quote-unquote benefit of becoming more and more isolated and less dependent on other people. In fact, right now I'm reading a science fiction novel that was written 60 years ago about a planet in which there's 20,000 humans and 200 million robots. And so there is no human contact at all. The humans depend solely on these robots, and they only interact with each other through the buffered and brokered world of these machines. So humans can only talk to each other through these machines. They don't have any physical human contact. And that's an extreme, but that's really the trajectory of what technology is and does. Technology isolates us. It is both the promise and it's the problem of technology, is that it's offering us an opportunity to isolate, and to not be needy on other people, and yet it's making us more isolated. And so we can talk about friendlessness among middle-aged men, which is a huge epidemic now. Loneliness is a major issue, and technology is not going to solve it. Facebook, which is the attempt to map out all of our human connections into one big grid, that's not going to end loneliness.
It's just
Facebook
incredible.
Live, Facebook Live is not going to end that. Skype won't. I mean, if you go on Skype and you video message someone, you can never make eye contact. You can look at yourself on the image, you can look at the video of your friend, or you can look into the camera, but you can never make eye contact. And that's a little parable of like what it's like in this age of technology. But that's what we want. We want to be surrounded by people when we're alone, and we want to be alone when we're out in public. And so it's this weird paradox, and it has huge implications for how we raise families, how we communicate and relate in local churches. So this is going to be a big issue going forward, but it's one we have to think about. Technology makes us lonely because that's what we want technology to do. It's the unintended consequence that now, like, how do we get over this when the blessing of technology is the isolation that we've wanted all along?
Again, this is something I hope that some pastors might consider for sermon topics, and to recognize that we are not to neglect the gathering together of one another, and the importance of church, and all the other aspects of that. Let me take one more before we take a break. And number 8, Tony, we get comfortable in secret vices. Now, the obvious one would be to go to pornography, but you're really talking about something much more significant. I wrote a book a number of years ago on the economy, and I had a whole chapter on consumerism and materialism. And that's as much what you're talking about in this chapter as some of the other secret vices, isn't it?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, your phone makes it, it provides this, what we think of as a veil where we can get by with doing things, buying things, seeing things online that are cloaked in anonymity, when in fact, all along, God sees our entire browsing history. And there's nothing we do in secret that's not before his eyes. And that includes consumerism. That includes pornography. It includes a lot of different vices that we think we're getting by with online in anonymity, and we're not. God sees it. And so Jesus uses that phrase, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. That phrase, if your eye causes you to sin, I think is a phrase we need to reclaim because it's a warning for the digital age. We need to pay attention to the fact that we can be sinning by what we look at.
Wow. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Tony Reinke. Again, the book is entitled 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. It is published by Crossway Books, and you can find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link to desiringgod.org and also information about the book and a video for you to watch. So all of that is available at our website, pointofview.net. Take the time to read that, to watch the video, maybe pass it on to others. And I would encourage you to download some of that material that is there so that you can use it in your own personal life, but then find a way to pass it on to others, especially for those of you that are teachers. I would encourage you to use some of these resources to warn people about some of the dangers that exist even with our smartphone. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. We recently discussed an Ohio court's refusal to consider the expulsion of a student studying for the priesthood from a Catholic college. That court declined jurisdiction because it would be forced to determine religious and doctrinal matters that are beyond the court's authority. A recent case out of Pennsylvania shows us that religious organizations remain subject to secular courts on matters neutral to religion. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, another religious college expelled a student weeks before graduation. The student alleged that he was expelled because of his race. The college asserted that the court would entangle itself in religious doctrine if it endeavored to hear the student's case, and therefore the ecclesiastical abstention doctrine should bar the court's intervention. But the state appellate court disagreed. It noted that determining claims for racial discrimination did not require the court to construe religious doctrine. The college had not claimed the expelled student violated any specific religious doctrine. Instead, the court concluded, quote, willful, deceitful, and dishonest behavior is routinely addressed through the law without resort to religious doctrine. As proponents of religious liberty, we believe the judiciary has its proper sphere of authority, every bit as much as the church has its own sovereignty. Where the church's sovereignty is distinct and superior, it is right for a court to defer to the religious body in governing itself. But when proper, the church is right to submit to a just government. Determining where that line is drawn is a serious task that courts must approach with great caution. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes as we talk with Tony Reinke about his book, 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. Got just a few left, and I thought we'd talk about one. We lose meaning. You know, we'd think some people would conclude that this gives me meaning because I've got all sorts of news and information, commentary. I'm really connecting with people digitally, but that isn't really the case, is it?
No, I mean, the Bible tells us to claw for wisdom, to seek after the kingdom like a buried treasure. It's something you have to work for. You have to get at it by clawing for it, like, you know, that gold treasure under the ground. It's under the surface of the ground, so you can't see God's divine wisdom. You can't see the treasure of the gospel when you're just skimming across the ephemeral bites of social media. You're not going to see it. There's no shortcuts to divine wisdom. That's what we see in Proverbs 1, 2, and 3. We see that in Job 28. It's this reminder that if you want divine wisdom, one, it's going to be done in the fear of God. Number two, it's going to be part of a relationship you have with God. It's not just a scholarly pursuit. And number three, it is going to take a lot of work and patience, and God is going to teach you things not only through his word, but through difficult circumstances and things that he's going going to bring you through. So there's no shortcuts to divine wisdom, but we oftentimes think there is, and we end up losing a sense of our place in his storyline, and we just get unrooted from the gospel and the kingdom and God's plan for our lives.
Fascinating. Tony, chapter 10, of course, we can relate to this. We fear missing out. FOMO. This is a word that I've used many times when I've been teaching. The fear of missing out. And there is this anxiety that individuals face when they go on Facebook. There are psychologists that have documented that individuals begin to feel inadequate because we put the best, the brightest, the most interesting on our Facebook pages, our Instagram, Twitter posts, whatever it might be. And a lot of people say, boy, I sure have a boring life compared to everybody else around me.
That's right. And we believe that, we ourselves won't ever miss out as long as we keep refreshing our phone. As long as we keep pulling down to refresh, pull down to refresh. It's as if we've bought into some sort of a contract that says if you keep refreshing your phone, you won't ever miss out. And that's simply a lie. And this is why, again, as Christians, we have an opportunity to say to the world, hey, guess what? You're going to miss out on a million things in this life. You're going to miss out on stock tips. You're going to miss out on wealth. You're going to miss out on, you name it. You're going to miss out every single day. And you know what? There's a place called heaven where everything that we miss out on as Christians in this world will be repaid back to us, will be reinstituted to us, it will be replaced and restored 1,000 times over for all eternity. And that's our hope. Our hope is that heaven is the fix for missing out. It's not refreshing our phones.
Well, and again, I hope that any listener right now, if there's anything you don't want to miss out, it is heaven. And there's only one way to heaven. That's through Jesus Christ, as we've talked about so many times. Let me take two more since I want to see if we could cover all 12. I think we'll do pretty well here. Chapter 11, we become harsh to one another. We've sort of already referred to that. And it is interesting that the First Lady is going to be addressing this issue of cyberbullying. And I'm actually on a board of a ministry that in the past actually dealt with such issues as abstinence and drugs, but now has probably developed a whole cottage industry on cyberbullying and bullying in general, as well as the use of technology. It seems to me that whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, you're recognizing that this is a real concern about what is happening to our dialogue, our lack of civility here in the 21st century.
Yeah, I'm surprised of all the 12 ways. Chapter 11 on being harsh to one another, I think, has generated the most incredible response from readers and emails and saying this is something that the church really needs to hear, and I'm grateful for that. But, yeah, we have dirt on one another. What do we do with the dirt that we have on one another? Because when we sling that dirt on a crystal screen, it seems so hygienic, so sanitary, so clean. But Scripture helps us to see that is really, that impulse is motivated by the sin in our own hearts to make ourselves feel good, or to just want to have some sort of power over other people. And we need to show grace and mercy to one another. And so, contrary to the impulses that feed online rage, we're just called to cultivate a heart of gentle patience as we bear with one another in our weaknesses, in our shortcomings. And this includes cyberbullying. There's so many manifestations of this. For some reason, we are just harsh to one another online, and we shouldn't be.
And one last one to talk about. Number 12, we lose our place in time. It is really easy to begin to lose perspective, especially because, as we've even talked about with our Millennial Roundtable, the focus is on the here and now, and to lose perspective of all the godly Christians that have come before you, to put some of the issues that you're addressing right now in historical context, or even more importantly, to put those in an eternal perspective. And what's something that, again, this technology tends to do is we tend to lose our place in time.
Yeah, we have digital ADD. We just lose a sense of our place in the world. And yet in the Bible, the word remember occurs 400 times in the Bible. I mean, there is a precious gift that God has given us in that we can, as His redeemed people, we can root ourselves in history, in a cosmic storyline that God has written and that is unfurling right now in cosmic history. And He intends for our lives to flourish as we look back to how God has redeemed us and how we're part of a larger redemptive storyline, and as we look forward to the coming of Christ and to the new heavens and the new earth. And so we're supposed to find ourselves within those those pillars of being reminded of the past and being reminded of what's to come in the future, and in that hope, and find ourselves in the middle of that. And the problem is we get so consumed with social media, these little bits, these little bites of content that are coming at us every single day, and we just simply lose a sense of our place in time. And that's going to lead to just an inability to find a rootedness in God's plan and in His creation.
Well, again, I might just mention we've covered all 12 of those ways your phone is changing you. You have a conclusion on living smartphone smart, which is very good, and an epilogue. So there's just a lot of great material. But just before we run out of time, let's again talk about, in case somebody has just joined us, what is available at desiringgod.org, because not only will they find out about your particular book and some of the other resources, but you'll have all the material about John Piper and some of the teachings. So just before we go, talk about what people will find when they land on the website.
Yeah, you'll find about 2,000 sermons from John Piper, which are excellent content to feed your soul. You're going to find books. We have 80-plus books. Many of them you can download for free in full at desiringgod.org/books. You can listen to the Ask Pastor John podcast, which is me asking the hardest questions I can come up with, and our followers can send us about ethics and theology, and I serve those up to John Piper, and we release 3 of those a week. You'll find all sorts of content like that and daily articles at desiringgod.org.
Well, Tony, thank you so very much for being with us. I would also commend to individuals that want to understand how to read carefully and to deeply to go to your book, Lit, A Christian Guide to Reading Books. So, again, it's just been a delight to have you on the program, and let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, let's do it again, Kirby. Thank you so much for your time.
Let's take a break, and when we come back tomorrow, it'll be our Friday weekend edition. This has been quite a week, and so we're going to do our best to try to cover all sorts of things that have been taking place. So, again, we'll have a roundtable discussion. Nick Pitts will be with us. Chelsea Yeoman will be with us. And, of course, we welcome your phone calls. We've not taken many this hour, and we will certainly be taking those calls tomorrow. So, again, you can find those at the website pointofview.net. Let me mention also that my commentary today, my Viewpoints commentary on economic freedom, is one that you might want to read, to also put on your Facebook page or send out as a Twitter post. And then also, of course, we have some great resources for you to take advantage of. The link to June Hunt's website, the link to Tony Reinke's website, all available at the website pointofview.net. And just as we go, let me also encourage some of you to consider what you might do to support this ministry. You can click on the banner that says Join the Truth Team. We would value your financial support. A one-time gift or a daily gift would be greatly appreciated. A monthly gift would be appreciated as well. That's all we have for today. See you back here tomorrow.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across